Okay, great. So we're about to let the room in, but I do want to take a group photo before we go. We're missing one person, but she's going to be late, and we'll superimpose her picture in. But if you guys happen to have a copy of your book that you want to hold up for the photo, feel free. Figure out.
Hold on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, with the virtual background. All right.
Oh, I see that.
I like the
Okay,
virtual.
I'm gonna turn off the virtual background for a second.
Okay.
I'll blur it because I'm in an Airbnb.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Oh, that's right. You're on your vacation.
All right.
Yes.
Ready?
Okay, it's still blurring. Never mind. I don't want it to look terrible. Sorry. Okay.
No wonder we haven't heard from you. I didn't know you were not at home.
I'm so sorry.
You're cool.
Okay, we ready? All right, everybody smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, very good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up the room. So anything now that you say will be heard by all.
Yeah, we used to get
Okay, and we are recording and we're opening the room so people can join us. And as they are joining us, welcome everybody. And you regulars know the routine. If you want to say hi in the chat books and let us know who's here and where you're joining us from, we would love to say hi to you while we're waiting for everyone to trickle in. And who's going to be the first? Always a good test to make sure it's working too. Lovely. Oh, hi. Okay, now there's Amber and Dorothy, Nicole, Janine, Lisa. Oh my goodness. Okay, Sacramento. I was just in Sacramento visiting my daughter this last weekend.
I was born in Sacramento. Great place.
Oh, you were? Oh, well, it has certainly changed.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and we have some Canadians joining us. Welcome.
Well,
Love
hello,
that.
Canadians. Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Lots of local people.
More Colorado, Montreal. Oh, I want to go to Montreal.
Oh, I love Montreal.
All right, I don't know if it's Beaufort or Beaufort, South Carolina. I know that South Carolina and North Carolina have the two different pronunciations. Hi, Connie from Pennsylvania. More Colorado. Wow, Colorado is representing.
Yes, my state.
Texas, Los Angeles. Hi, Denise. Easton, PA, home of Crayola Factory. Oh, I love that. I didn't know that. Arlene says, you're welcome to Montreal anytime, but wait for the summer. I think I'll take you up on that.
Yes,
I'm a
I
Sandy
have never
Weaver and I'm
been.
wimpy.
Yeah, I was in Quebec. Gosh, what was it? March of, I want to say it was 2011. It must have been 2009. The coldest I've ever been in my entire life, and I'm from Colorado, so we know from cold. OMG! I still have the boots I bought on that trip. I bought some serious mucklucks. Love them.
Speaking of the cold, we have Rochester, Minnesota represented. Hi, Dawn, Cynthia, Diane, Judy. Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know we have a lot more people who will be trickling in, but I do like to be respectful of everybody's time. If you want to remember to put your little blue chat box onto everyone instead of hosts and panelists, so everyone can see your comments and everyone can see all the bingo calls, because we are going to play bingo in the chat box. Welcome, everybody. My name is Susan Macbeth. I'm the founder and owner of Adventures by the Book, and I'd like to welcome you to our March edition of Book Bingo, celebrating Women's History Month. And we have some fabulous women with fabulous books about women here to dazzle you today. Before I get started, I do want to thank Amber and Debbie, who are behind the scenes and make this all possible, because there's a lot of moving parts to this event, and they make it flow very smoothly, and we're grateful to them. Thanks to all of you who have pre-ordered books from our 6 authors today. We appreciate your support, and we have been sending those out, or will be sending those out if you just place your order, and we can take those orders up through tomorrow. So feel free, if somebody inspires you today, feel free to go ahead and go to our website and place your book orders, and we'll send those out. A couple upcoming events I wanted to mention: if you are in San Diego or around, we're doing a self-care and sisterhood adventure, meditation, mindfulness on Saturday morning in La Jolla. For a virtual event, we just added a really interesting event with all the news about Michelangelo's David. We decided we wanted to do an event with an art historian, Laura Morelli, who wrote a book called The Giant about Michelangelo's David, and she's going to talk about why art like that is so important to the Western world continuing today. So that's going to be fascinating. It's virtual. And then our travel adventure, we have some wine and book pairing events. We call it Reading Between the Vines, our new series, which is going to be in Sonoma at Hook and Ladder Winery. And we're really excited about that. We have 3 Sundays in a row in April, so you can check out our calendar for those events. It's going to be really fun. So we're going to go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, the bingo game is going to be played in the chat box. So the authors don't have to pay attention to that. They're not involved in that. So they can just chat with you and connect with you and talk about their fabulous books. So how it works is you each got a link to a virtual bingo card. I'm sorry if you didn't get your link and we're not able to send it at this point, but you can still join us for the Zoom portion of it. And also you can play with us next time. You do not have to have a blackout. You can win by horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. And the only calls that are legitimate are ones that Debbie types in the chat box, which she's going to do now as an example, and say bingo call, and then like that. So example, that's how you're going to see the bingo calls. Any other words that the authors say or somebody else speaks does not count as a bingo call. You'll just check that off on your bingo card. Make sure to click it on your bingo card, because we determine winners by the computer generated winners. We don't choose the winners. We let the computer pick it. And if you forgot to check a box and you call bingo, the computer's going to say you did not win because it doesn't have record of you clicking on that box. So we typically call about 10 winners, but we only give 6 prizes. And the reason we do that is because sometimes people do make mistakes. And the first 6 winners aren't always legitimate winners according to the computer, and we want to keep it fair to everyone. So you will be notified by email if you are a winner. Even if you call bingo, that does not mean you're a winner. So if we don't email you after you call bingo, that means that for some reason the computer decided you were not a winner. So I just like to make that clear from the start. And I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And we are getting started with Kate Thompson, who is joining us all the way across the pond after midnight there. So she is a really good sport to join us today. We're very excited to have her. She worked as a journalist for 20 years on women's magazines and national newspapers. She's passionate about uncovering the stories she considers missing from history books. And we know there are a lot missing, especially when it comes to underrepresented voices, for sure. Her latest novel, The Little Wartime Library, is based on the remarkable true story of an underground shelter library in World War II. Founded in the chaos of the Blitz, the pioneering underground library provided the solace, sanctuary, and escapism of books in London's darkest hour. Wow, Kate, that sounds amazing. Please tell us more.
Thank you. Hi, well, thank you everybody for having me here. I've got to say it's been a long time since I've been up past midnight, so this is a first for me. So yes, as Susan explained, my name is Kate Thompson. I'm a journalist, ghostwriter and novelist, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all this evening. So people always ask me, how did you become a writer? It's always the #1 question at talks. And I think the honest answer for me would be, it's the only thing that I have ever been able to do. You know, when I was at school, maths might as well have been in a foreign language. You know, I only came out of school, unfortunately, with 1 GCSE, much to my mother's horror. I think boys and hormones generally got in the way. As I said, the only thing I could ever do was write stories, and I absolutely loved it. I managed to do some work experience on my local paper, and through that, I got the only non-graduate place on a journalism course. And journalism for me was like slipping into a warm bath. You know, it just made sense to me. And I worked for over 20 years on Fleet Street, on national newspapers and magazines. And I loved finding and listening to stories. And I always remember 3 things that my old editor said to me, and have stayed with me my whole career, right through into writing novels. 1, true life is always more extraordinary than anything that you can ever make up. 2, Don't ever interrupt an interviewee when somebody is speaking and there's a silence. Don't fill it. Sit with the silence. And 3, and I think this is possibly the most important piece of advice, that there is an art to active listening. We've got to listen with our hearts as well as our ears. Everyone has a story to tell. None of us have lived in a vacuum. And, you know, I think the more you listen, the more you hear. So I've tried to take those 3 pieces of advice with me throughout. Those skills really helped me. And when I was made redundant from my job as a magazine, when I was pregnant with my second son, a friend of mine suggested, oh, why don't you try ghostwriting, which is something she tried her hand up at. But writing books, you know, always felt like a dream too big. I felt like you probably had to have a degree from a fancy university to write books. Writing books wasn't something that someone like me could do. But working as a ghostwriter gave me the confidence to see that I could write a long form narrative and the opportunity to play with different writing styles. So the first book I ever wrote was called Aprons and Silver Spoons, about 12 years ago. And it was about a lady called Molly Moran, who was this fantastic character. She worked as a scullery maid in domestic service between the wars. And her memoir actually went on to become #1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list, making her Britain's oldest author at 101. And it was around the same time that Downton Abbey hit the screen. So there was this fascination for, you know, below stairs kind of life. And she was this fascinating and naughty character. You know, she was forever sneaking out of the big house to go to dances with the chauffeur. And she once told me, oh, the butler had a bum so firm you could bounce a penny off it. She was, you know, she just filled my life with joy, really. But butlers' bums aside, what I really learned from Molly was the intriguing way that war had shaped women's lives. For Molly, you know, war was a springboard out of drudgery for her. She joined the services, she became a wren, she traveled the world, she had adventures, and suddenly, you know, she experienced autonomy and freedom. And so I became fascinated with the effect of war upon women's lives, and how for many they found equality, autonomy, freedom. And that's this sort of strange dichotomy, I think, that amid all the horror of war, women could also find freedom. And so when my editor suggested I try my hand at a novel, I decided to have a go using the listening and research skills that I'd gained as a journalist and writing from ghostwriting. So all my novels are set in the East End of London. I'm sure a place many of you are familiar with from Call the Midwife. I'd always been intrigued by the romance and mythology of East London, fueled by images of foggy lamplit streets and the legends of the Krays and Jack the Ripper. So I went up to Bethnal Green, which is a suburb of East London, and I met these 2 formidable Cockney women called Vera and Kathy. And I interviewed them, and they told me in detail about the Blitz and their pride at being EastEnders and remaining in the bomb-shattered East End. And at the end of the interview, Kathy said to me, oh, don't go, my love, we've knitted you something. And she pulled out something from her knitting bag in a sort of soft white wool with a little blue ribbon around the top. And I thought, oh, how sweet. You know, I just had my second son. I thought, oh, she's knitted baby booties. Anyway, she held this up and it unfolded, and it was a willy warmer. And the 2 of these women, they absolutely, I never forget it. I flushed bright red. They fell about laughing. And I tell you this story really because it shattered my preconceptions about not just East End women, but all older women. They weren't sweet or doddery. They were irreverent and subversive and wickedly funny and showed huge loyalty and courage. And then they took me, and the shocks didn't stop there. They took me to Bethnal Green tube station, and they showed me a grainy old plaque on the wall dedicated to the 173 people who lost their lives down the tube in a devastating crush during an air raid in 1943. And here's where it gets weird. They showed me a programme. Each year there is a memorial service to the people who lost their lives during the air raid. And there, on a roll call to the dead, was my name, Kate Thompson. And this gave me an immediate emotional connection to this woman, and I became determined to find out more. It got me thinking, who is the other Kate Thompson, and what led her to flee to the so-called sanctuary of the underground that day? And did we share more than just a name? So I did some digging in my journalistic fashion, and I discovered the other Kate Thompson was born in 1880 in Poplar, East London. And by the time of World War II, she was a mother of 9 sons, which makes my 2 sons seem fairly modest in comparison. Pre-war, Bethnal Green housed some of the worst slums in London, and one of them was the most notorious, was called Queen Square, a place where locals say you never went after dark and policemen only visited in pairs. The dark tenement block was built around a central square, and the mostly 2-room flats housed families of a density of nearly 5 times that. One woman I interviewed recalls a mother of 25 children looking after them in just 2 rooms. None of the flats had their own water taps or toilets. Tenants shared facilities on the landing between 4 families. Washhouse facilities were housed on the roof, and the women of the square had to drag their laundry up 6 flights of stairs or down to the local bagwash. It was a Herculean task for these proud women to keep their families clean. By August 1938, Kate Thompson and many others lived in a squalid, dilapidated hellhole. Not only that, the landlords were having a merry time at their expense, charging exorbitant rents for miserly facilities. But this is what I love about Kate. Far from being a dormant victim, Kate and the other residents of the square promptly formed a tenants association, and everyone flatly refused to pay their rents until the rapacious landlords reduced the rents to more reasonable levels. They also demanded that necessary repairs to the property be carried out. The biggest rent strike ever seen in the East End sent the press wild. Buoyed by their success, Kate and the other women paraded around Bethnal Green with their placards. They held daily meetings and they picketed the estate office from morning until night. Apparently, every time the landlord went into the square, a huge crowd of women and children followed them and booed them, hissing them, pelting them with hot potatoes and rotten vegetables. And so it was that Kate and her neighbours scored a resounding victory for the working class underdogs of Queen Square. The landlords acceded to their demands to lower the rent and carry out repairs, paving the way for success of other tenants' associations. A year later, war broke out, and Kate began the second great fight of her life. During this cataclysmic period, she helped to nurse her son through double pneumonia. She extinguished incendiary bombs on the roof, and she became this formidable chief female or matriarch of her buildings. So to die in a preventable accident on the steps down to the tube in 1943, to me, seemed like such a tragic waste of a magnificent life. Discovering the other Kate Thompson was the catalyst for wanting to uncover the richness and the complexity of the matriarchy in the East End. I just thought, if she's this amazing, what are the other women like? 11 books on, I still don't feel I've touched the surface. I am dedicated to documenting the stories of working class women, the women the history books forgot, women who have made a massive contribution to the social, the economic, the political history of their communities, women for whom there are no statues, but there really ought to be. And finding out about Kate has really proved to me that history isn't dusty or irrelevant, and that finding out about our surprising pasts has a hand in shaping our future. And that's it. I don't know if I went over 8 minutes, but I hope that gives you an overview of why I chose to write and why history for me is endlessly fascinating. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kate. And we are so glad you're telling these stories. I was just going to read a comment and then the section. All right, Julie said, wow, amazing perspective regarding war versus women's autonomy. So we're so glad you're telling these stories, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Christina Lynch, who was the Milan correspondent for W Magazine and Women's Wear Daily. And she disappeared for 4 years in Tuscany. Imagine that. Why would she want to do that? Which inspired her debut book, The Italian Party. Her new book, Sally Brady's Italian Adventure, I love the name, is set in Hollywood and Italy from 1931 to 1947 and follows effervescent Sally Brady as she goes from Dust Bowl refugee to glamorous gossip columnist in Rome, then gets stranded in fascist era Tuscany. Tell us about Sally Brady and her adventure, Christina. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Kate, you are a hard act to follow. But I think there is a natural transition there. I also, as Susan said, I was a journalist, and I became interested in, as you said, documenting the contributions and the lives of women in wartime. So I created a little PowerPoint, and I'm going to turn on my 8-minute timer. Go. So I'm going to try to share this with you, and let's see if it works. Is it working? Yes. Okay. So now it's 7 minutes and 42 seconds. So in 2018, my first novel, The Italian Party, came out. And this novel was set in 1956 in Siena. And thus it was very kind of contained. Obviously, I had to research the era of the Cold War, but at least I was researching kind of one city in one period. And it's about an American couple. I'm not going to give it away, but they do have really huge secrets. And I was fortunate enough, as Susan mentioned, to live in Italy for 7 years in my 20s. And so many Italians said things like, oh, yes, when the Americans did this and the Americans did that. And I sort of dismissed that as, sort of conspiracy theories. And then as different books came out about the CIA and the CIA declassified things, it became clear that everything the Italians were saying about American interference in their culture was true. But it was sort of limited in scope. I needed to learn a lot about the Cold War, but really set in one place. So for the next novel, why not go big, right? My friend Maureen, who's also a journalist on the left, said, hey, you wrote about the 50s. Why not go back in time and set your next novel during World War II? And I thought, okay, she said, you should come back to Italy, come to Florence and meet my ex-mother-in-law, who has a really interesting story to tell. So how do you say no to that, right? So I went to Florence and I met her ex-mother-in-law, who had been hid from the Nazis as a child at age 3 to 4, and in a couple of different convents in and around Florence. And it was a really interesting story, but I felt really stymied by the idea of how to tell the story of a 4-year-old child. Other people could do that, but I felt like that wasn't quite the story that I was looking for. So I contacted a historian, and I went down to really see these areas where the war was fought very directly in Italy. I mean, it went up the whole thing, but the sort of famous battlefield areas around Cassino and Anzio. So I hired this fabulous female historian, and she took me around to all these places, but it was a lot of this, which is extremely moving, but in terms of cemeteries, looking at the names on the headstones, people from 22 nations fought. Oops, I'm a little bit unstable. Hopefully you can hear me. But soldiers from 22 nations were fighting in this one area in Cassino. And there were a lot of exhibits and things that, permanent exhibitions about the war. But I would look at these things and my mind would kind of go blank, like, that's not a novel, right? So I started to panic. And when I panic, this happens. So I started looking for inspiration at the dinner table, which, not a bad place. But continued doing the research and looking at, okay, the Allies and the Germans fought for 9 months over this one river crossing. Like, ooh, okay, that is maybe as a comic novelist, not really my subject. The Germans stood here and bombed the Allies down in that valley for all that time. Okay, now I'm really not knowing what I'm going to write about. You see the frozen grin on my face, like, this is all great, but I have no idea what this book is going to be about. So I'm once again eating. I came across this poster for the Women of the Landing. And this was about the Allied nurses and women who landed with the Allies at Anzio. But of course, the exhibition was over. But I did stand in this spot once again and looked around at these beaches, and the historian was saying, okay, so the ships came in here and they landed here and they were being shelled. And I thought, yeah, this is a John Huston movie, but it's not really a novel about, it's not the novel I can write about women in wartime. There are, as Kate was saying, I mean, the stories are completely amazing of the women who went in. Many of them are buried here in the cemetery at Anzio. I also really wanted to pay attention to the Italian women and their stories. And this is in a mountain village in that area. These are lists of women and children who lost their lives in this period. Again, eating my way through my writerly anxieties, and driving around looking at different buildings that were destroyed. And all I ended up with was writer's block. So driving back north, back towards Florence, I have a rental car with no AC. I get off this, and I start wandering the garden, and I thought, you know what? I could set a novel in this place. And what if the character that I'm writing about happened to end up in this war zone without really any preparation or training? And what if her documents, she had given away her documents to somebody who needed them much more than she did, and ended up having to hide in Siena and then escape into the countryside? And I thought, okay, that is a story I can tell. So suddenly I was happy and relaxed. This is what I wrote. It is a fast, fun adventure story in the mold of Dickens. As Susan said, set in Hollywood and Italy. It's a young American girl who loses her documents. There's my timer. And it is inspired very much by these stories that I heard from my friends, from the historian of Italians resisting fascism and risking their lives to save strangers that were trapped there. So that is the novel, Sally Brady's Italian Adventure. It's out in June, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. And thanks to those of you who pre-ordered her book. And just remember, she said it's coming out in June. So don't email us next week saying, why haven't you got your book yet? You will be getting it in June. Thank you. And a reminder that if you have a bingo, you are going to type in the chat box in all caps so we can see it, bingo, and you put your name and your email address, and we will document that. Next up, we have Janis Robinson Daly. Intrigued by the discovery that her ancestor was a founder of the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, Janis found her next career direction, unearthing the stories of women whose lives have remained in the shadows. With a love of history, she explores female-centric issues and the power of supportive relationships developed among women. Her book, The Unlocked Path, presents and embraces a new woman of the early 20th century, educated, career-minded, independent. Yes, go Janis, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Susan. And I am zooming in from a library, just wrapped a library presentation. So hence, I don't have a fun background. But delighted to be here with you tonight, wrapping up Women's History Month. So I also have a couple of slides to share with you all, and hopefully that will come right up. You've seen that now? Women's History Month. Okay, so just actually want to start off and let everyone know that I have been featuring a different historical fiction book every day this month to celebrate some of those stories that haven't been told until authors like us started to write them. So I've had a lot of fun with this, engaged with a lot of readers and authors and all, and the full list is on my website. You might recognize some of those covers, and I'm just putting out a call now so that hopefully next year I will have a completely new set of 31 books, and we'll be looking for Kate, Christina, Amy's, and Sarah's, because I do already have By Her Own Design on there by Piper. So just wanted to make mention of that. And, you know, we are so fortunate that these stories are starting to be told. So, you know, we often hear about the women in the shadows behind the men, and the men that are doing the great things, but it's the women behind them. Occasionally, there's a man behind the women. So I'm gonna turn it on its head a little bit for Women's History Month and just share with you how I discovered my inspiration for my story. Actually, did come from my genealogy research, looking into my grandmother Robinson's family, and found her grandfather. So my great-great-grandfather, William Shannon Pierce in Philadelphia. And I am following up in speaking after two journalists with extensive writing background, of which I really don't have much, strategic writing for business. But so this is my debut novel, but I was really moved when I started to learn more about Judge Pierce, that I discovered he had been a founder in 1850 of the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. And I had gone to a women's college myself, Wheaton College in Massachusetts, and was immediately drawn to the idea that there were women medical colleges. I had never heard of that. I knew that most women, you know, in the 1800s, 1700s were denied admission for the most part to medical schools. So it was forward-thinking men that got together and started some of these schools, including the one in Philadelphia, which was the first, and actually became the longest running school for women only. In 1970, they started to admit some men, and then they merged with Drexel finally in Philadelphia. But once I'm starting to discover that there were women out there that wanted that accredited degree, so they could claim that they were a doctor. Of course, women have been midwives and healers, you know, throughout history, but it was being able to call them a professional in the study of medicine and practice of medicine that was going to make a difference for these women. So I said to myself, as I'm looking for a new hobby and starting a new chapter myself in my life, that I think I'm going to write a book. I got very bold and brave, and with the support of my own family, my husband and sons, I started down this path of researching the women's medical school, and more importantly, the graduates and the students of that school. And that's what I figured. They were amazing women whose stories haven't been told. And so if they haven't been told, who's going to tell them? Why not me? So enrolled in some creative writing classes, went to some writing conferences, worked with editors, and was inspired really, first and foremost. I'm going to introduce you to a couple of women graduates that inspired me in writing the book and who appear in The Unlocked Path as characters. And the first is actually Anna Debai Gopal Joshi. She came from India when she was 17 years old, had been married at the age of 9, lost her first child when she was 14, and was so distraught over the loss of that child, when she's barely a child herself, that she took her grief and loss of the child, and understanding a lot of it stemmed from a lack of care for herself and for her son and for so many other women that were also fearful of male doctors. And so they often even avoided seeking out care because they didn't want a man treating them. So she took her grief and she turned it into an inspiration and a determination. She wanted to study medicine, and she wanted to help the other women around her by being treated by a woman doctor. So I'm meeting Anna Dubai and I'm learning her story, and then I discover her application letter to the Women's Medical College. She decides to come to America to study medicine. And I'll just read it to you quickly, an excerpt, because it was her words that were so eloquent and so powerful that really tipped me over into writing the story of these women. The determination which has brought me to your country against the combined opposition of my friends and caste ought to go a long way towards helping me to carry out the purpose for which I came, i.e. is to render to my poor suffering countrywomen the true medical aid they so sadly stand in need of, in which they would rather die than accept at the hands of a male physician. The voice of humanity is with me, and I must not fail. My soul is moved to help the many who cannot help themselves. Now, here is a 17-year-old woman so moved at that calling to study medicine that she leaves India at the age of 17 and comes with the support of her husband to study medicine in the US and earn that accredited degree and return to India as a woman doctor. So Anna Dubai was nothing less than amazing. And then a couple of other women that I met that also I bring into the story that I felt should be celebrated as well. Women like Olga Pavinsky, who came from Lithuania, also at the age of 18, didn't speak a word of English when she arrived here, and went on to study and graduate in 1901. She ended up with a 40-year career with the Department of Public Health in New York, studying infectious diseases. And I learned a lot of science terms that I had forgotten from my Bio 101 class and everything else, but it was an amazing story to learn about Olga and all that she did in the study of diphtheria vaccines, designing culture bottles that Salk ended up using for his polio vaccine discovery. So amazing women like Olga that I felt she needed to be in my story as well. And one more, Charlotte Fairbanks came from Vermont to a women's medical college after earning degrees from Smith and Bryn Mawr and Yale, became a surgeon, and with 50 other women went to France to serve during World War I as an all-American, all-women's hospital unit. Offered their services to the US Army, who politely said, no, thank you. We don't need women on the front lines treating our soldiers. So they went anyway, and they treated the French civilians, and they were recognized by the French government and awarded medals of valor for their work. And then eventually the US Army did come around and send them some soldiers to be treated that way. So it was really, learning about these women that so inspired me, that I wanted to take my composite fictional character, Eliza, into medical school, why she wants to go to medical school, convincing her mother of letting her go to medical school in 1897, studying through 4 years, and then, of course, interacting with all the different women's health issues that would arise, many that still plague us today. So hopefully I've brought some of their stories forward from the shadows, and really have been intrigued by this American Women's Hospital Unit. So setting that up to be explored further for book 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Janis. And I can see why you were inspired by these stories, and we're so glad you told them in your book. So I just want to remind everybody that all 6 of our authors today are Novel Network members, which means they are anxious, excited, available to talk with book clubs virtually. I don't know, maybe some of them are even doing in person if they're in your neighborhood, I don't know. But all you have to do is go to novelnetwork.com and check them out, and you can read about them and their books and view their calendar of availability. It's for book clubs, reading groups, libraries, anybody who's interested in meeting with a fabulous author, who all 6 of them are. So thank you, Janis. Next up is Piper Huguley, named in 2015 as a top 10 historical romance novelist in Publishers Weekly. Piper Huguley is the author of the Reconstruction Era Home to Milford College series. Her biographical historical fiction, By Her Own Design, tells the inspiring story of the Black fashion designer of Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress. The book was a Booklist Top 100 Editor's Choice selection for 2022 and was named one of the top 100 books of 2022 in Canada by the Globe and Mail newspaper. Congratulations, Piper, and we can't wait to hear more.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is really great. I'm sorry to see March come to an end. You know, I always learn something during this particular time of year. And so, yeah, I'm sorry to see it come to an end. But yeah, Janis, who I had an event with at the end of February here in Atlanta, has sent around her survey. And so I certainly hope that people respond to that survey so that we can see more of these great stories for next year. My book, By Her Own Design, is centered around the life of one real life woman by the name of Anne Cole Lowe, who was born in 1898 in a small spit of a town, Clayton, Alabama. And her being born at that particular point in time and place meant that there are certain aspects of her life, her early life, that we don't know much about. The whole aspect of being born a Black woman in Jim Crow, Alabama meant that, for instance, she didn't have a birth certificate. It meant that she was subject to certain kinds of indignities and abuse, like her child marriage when she was only 12 years old. And she became a mother to one son when she was 15. That being said, Anne Lowe was a bit of a prodigy. She was the daughter of another seamstress and the daughter of another seamstress and the granddaughter of another seamstress and great-granddaughter. All the way back into enslavement was this female line that made dresses for the elite in Alabama, that Anne, her mother, and her grandmother sewed for the wives, of course, since they were not in politics at that time, of the Alabama state legislature, and eventually for the first lady of Alabama as well. And it was when her mother had a commission for the first lady of Alabama that her mother died unexpectedly. And at 16 years old, Anne had to take up and finish the commission. This wasn't a problem for Anne because she'd been sewing since she was 8 years old, so she was like, oh, I've got that. She started off by taking the scraps that she found at the feet of her mother and grandmother while they were sewing and making flowers out of them. And so flowers became a bit of her signature in terms of the designs that she then created across the rest of her life and into her career as not just a seamstress, but as a fashion designer to the social elite. Part of her story is that she does escape her abusive marriage when a woman sees what she's dressed in a department store, and this woman happens to be a wife of a citrus magnate in Tampa. And this poor woman has 4 daughters. 2 of them are twins who are about to get married, and they have no trousseau. And so she asked Anne Lowe, is there something that you can do in terms of whoever sewed your clothes. And Anne admits that she sewed them, and she was able to escape from where she was in Alabama at that time to Tampa to sew for this woman and her daughters, the Tampa community, which embraced her. And she became, very interestingly, for a Black woman in the South at that particular point in time, the Gasparilla designer. Tampa has an event every year in terms of at the around Lent time. And she became the official designer of the Gasparilla court for 3 years during the 1920s. Her designs with the floral touches became so widespread, so known, that she ultimately designed for other famous women like the Roosevelts, Vanderbilts, Marjorie and Meriwether Post, and ultimately came into the knowledge with Janet Auchincloss, who was getting married to her second husband and commissioned Anne to do her second wedding outfit. And that meant that she then became acquainted with Jacqueline Bouvier, who was Janet Auchincloss's daughter. And so, let me share my screen. I have a couple of pictures here that I'm looking to share. Come on. Okay, there. So this is one of Anne's wedding gowns. It is not the wedding gown she is most famous for in terms of Jacqueline Bouvier's wedding gown, but it is just one of the gowns that she has done. And this is from 1941 in terms of it. And the floral touches here on this particular one, you might see these are two calla lilies, for instance. So some of the things that she did in terms of the ways in which she incorporated the floral touches were quite singular. This is Anne herself. As you can see, her dress for herself is quite understated, but always extremely well tailored. And this is what drew the eye of Josephine Lee, the wife of the citrus magnate who saw her in the department store, was how well tailored they were, but very unassuming, always dressed in her little black dress, and always had her hat on as a touch. And of course, next to her is the famous Jacqueline Bouvier wedding gown that she did for her in 1953. There's quite a story behind this gown because approximately 10 days before the wedding, a pipe burst in her studio, destroying the dress and 9 of the bridesmaids' gowns as well. And so Anne had to rush completion of another set of dresses so that the wedding, which was more like a coronation, to be honest, because there were 800 at the church and 1,200 for the reception, the entire United States Senate and their wives were invited, and she pulls it off. But that's part of the story in terms of what happens in the book by her own design. This is Anne in later years where she is posed in front of one of her creations. And so you see the floral touch with the uses of lace as she applied it there. This is kind of small, but it's a copy. It's when she designed the Deb dress for Jackie when she was Deb of the Year in 1947. These are all mini roses around her waist and around her neck as well. That is the floral touch. And this is another dress that she did for Jackie when she accompanied her younger sister to her Deb dress, to her Deb ball 4 years later. This is Jackie in the famous dress. For her sitting for her portrait. And another famous commission of hers was that she did the Oscar dress when Olivia de Havilland won the Oscar in 1947. There's also a story behind this dress that is part of the book. You can see it's sort of rather early example of strapless, but her floral touch, the way it's incorporated here, is in this floral painting that is embellished on the front of the dress from the bust line all the way to the floor. That is hand painted onto the fabric. This is not a stencil, and so it knocks me out every time I think of that because I can only draw a stick figure myself. And here's Anne in the studio in later years with a gown, with a dress, and you can see all of the floral roses, the floral fabric roses are on this particular dress or around the hem. It's kind of a really kicky little dress that somebody in the 60s, no doubt, had great fun wearing. So By Her Own Design takes you on the inspirational journey of this woman's life. She had great ups and great downs, to be sure, but was very inspiring in terms of her example that if you have a dream and you're determined and persistent, you'll reach that dream and you'll reach that goal. I just like to say those two other things that the ebook of By Her Own Design will be on sale across all platforms for $1.99 to the end of the month. So you could pick up a copy of that for less than a cup of coffee. And her exhibit, one of the long held wishes that at least I have while I had been researching her for this book will come to fruition here in the United States at the Winter Third, just outside of Philadelphia, starting in September, commemorating the 70th wedding anniversary of Jack and Jackie, where they have reconstructed the wedding gown, and didn't take them just 10 days to be able to do it, and 40 of her gowns that have been brought forth from art museums across the country that will be on display from September into January of 2024. So I hope people go to see it.
So much juicy, inspiring information. And so I hope everybody picks up your book. And I hope all our authors are reading the comments in the chat box, because you clearly have fans out there. I also want to shout out to Dorothy and to Simon for their regular support of Novel Network. Simon typed in, Piper came to the Zoom book club I was part of in February and was very engaging. Novel Network is a fantastic service for getting authors to connect with book clubs and makes for very interesting discussions. Highly recommend. Thank you, Simon. And thank you to Dorothy, the book whisperer, who always does amazing blogs and book reviews. You can check her out at her blogs are sometimes posted on Novel Network, but you can also go to the book whisperer as well. So thank you to them and everybody who supports Novel Network. Next up, we have Aimie Runyan. Aimie is an international best-selling author of historical fiction. She's been nominated for a Rocky Mountain Fiction Writer of the Year Award and 2 Colorado Book Awards. In her intriguing historical novel, The School for German Brides, a young woman who is sent to a horrific bride school to be molded into the perfect Nazi wife finds her life forever intertwined with a young Jewish woman about to give birth. However, I just learned that she received the arc of her next book, A Bakery in Paris, and I think she may be talking about that. We'll have to see, but both sound intriguing. Welcome, Aimie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So it's okay. I don't want to screw up the bingo game, but it's okay if I talk about A Bakery in Paris?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm starting my timer as well. And if you guys have to forgive the fake Parisian background, I am actually coming to you live from Yarmouth, Massachusetts. I literally just drove by the Kennedy compound not a few hours ago, so I'm definitely feeling the Jackie vibe. So thank you to Piper. And I just can't say enough nice things about Piper's book. I got to be one of the lucky people who was an early reader on that book, and I loved it so much. So make sure you all pick up that book because it's absolutely wonderful. So it is so great to be here tonight. And if you guys have any questions about the School for German Brides, I'm happy to answer those. But I am very excited to talk about my upcoming book, A Bakery in Paris, which I'm going to put in. Hopefully you guys can see it now. You can't see it with the fake background. Maybe I'll unblur it. Well, you know what? I'll do better. I'm going to share my screen and show you. I'm going to talk about. This is the inspiration. This is both the cover for A Bakery in Paris and the bakery. It's that's kind of a stylized view. That's an actual bakery in Paris that I sort of modeled my bakery on. And the cool thing is, if you look at my previous books, these are my 4 most recent books. I have 2 previous to those. We have The School for German Brides, Across the Runyan River, Girls on the Line, and Daughters in the Night Sky. And all of those are deeply unmeshed in the world wars. We've got Daughters of the Night Sky, which is the Russian front, Across the Runyan River, which is multi-timeline World War II, and dealing with kind of both sides of the war. The School for German Brides being unique because it is kind of the home front from the German perspective, from both the perspective of a young Jewish woman and a young German woman. And then Girls on the Line being World War I, and one of the American groups, the women who served in the U.S. Army Signal Corps. So these are all deeply enmeshed. But what A Bakery in Paris does differently is that it tells the story of Paris rebuilding after 2 conflicts, and is my first time in many books deviating away from the world wars. We have 2 timelines. One, the first takes place in 1870, and it is during and after the siege of Paris from the Prussians, which is basically the first of the third, how the world wars really got their start. It was a terrible time for Paris because it was encircled by the Prussians. They were being starved out. People were eating their pets. It was a horrific time in Parisian history. And then what was born from that was the Paris Commune, which was an uprising of the common worker trying to regain control of Paris from the ultra elite. And we see that struggle throughout Lisette's timeline. It really kind of is a bit of a Les Mis sort of vibe to that side of the story, which is really exciting to explore. And whereas, of course, we're dealing with war and conflict, it is a departure from the time periods I dealt with before. It was, it was a departure from definitely the familiar aspects of World War I and World War II. And so why did I do that? Well, I was dating a really nice historian at the time who suggested, because I was in the process of hunting for ideas, and he said, well, why don't you look into writing about the Paris Commune? And I did a Google search, and I was like, that young man has got a really good idea. And so I played with it some more and came up with the concept for A Bakery in Paris. And I ended up writing The School for German Brides first, but then I got to do A Bakery in Paris for my option book, and it's great. And as luck would have it, I ended up marrying that very nice historian a couple years ago. So yay for me. So A Bakery in Paris, the second half has to do with the lesser known aspect, not lesser known, but less often described aftermath of World War II in Paris. And, an author who does a brilliant job of that is Anne Ma, going back to the Kennedy connection, Jacqueline in Paris, and how Paris sort of rebuilding, but it's a little bit further down the road. This is literally a young woman who is searching for her missing mother, and it's kind of the crux of the whole thing. And so really the story is two sides of the same coin. You have two women who are trying to find their way in Paris that has been turned on its ear. It no longer resembles the Paris of their birth. You have in Lisette's time, she has intentionally decided to leave a life of comfort to live a life of more meaning, with a man that she that stands for everything that she grew up not believing in. He's a man that definitely stands for the rights of the people and the rights of the the proletariat, where she grew up in the grande bourgeoisie in a very nice part of the city, and she gives up that life of comfort to build something meaningful. And she builds a bakery in the heart of Montmartre with hardly a few pennies to her name. She's able to buy this ramshackle building her husband had been renting the apartment above the store, and the store had been vacant. They end up buying the building, and she turns it in one of the darkest hours of Paris's history into a modest bakery to help feed the population in that neighborhood. Now, it's important to understand that in the late 19th century, bread was not just an important staple, it was, it was a massive element of the French diet. It's like rice to the Asian cultures. There wasn't a meal served without it. And in fact, people ate a couple pounds of bread every single day. Now, we won't get into the nutritional aspects of why that maybe not be a good idea, but it certainly is tasty. But the interesting thing is that when I went to Paris to visit, I finally got to go, the summer of revenge travel last year. And I got to go to Paris and I was so excited. I was going to go to La Galette des Moulins. In the book, it's called Le Bijou. The Gem is the name of the bakery, and there's significance for that. But I got to go to La Galette des Moulins and it was shuttered. It was permanently closed about a month before I arrived. So whereas I'd had visions of buying 3 dozen pastries and eating them like in one sitting and taking pictures until the owners threw me out, it was boarded up. And it was significant because even now in the year 2022, you had to walk blocks and blocks to find another bakery. And in the here and now, okay, well, you find there's literally a Starbucks across the street. There's, which is, maybe a bakery-ish, but to buy actual bread, no. There's cafes, there are restaurants, and that's great. But if you think about the importance of bread to the French diet back in 1870, it was enormous. And to spend an extra half hour each way of your day walking to buy a loaf or two of bread, that is a huge imposition on your time. And baking bread is, it's a huge undertaking. As devoted as French women are, to the craft of cooking, that's a big investment of time, and so they often don't. And then, I found that really significant. And in the second story, we have a woman kind of picking up the mantle of her great grandmother's legacy, and her struggles with that, and struggling to find her place in a world where her choices have been taken from her. So that, in a nutshell, is A Bakery in Paris that is coming to you August 1st, 2023 from the good people at William Morrow Books. And I hope you enjoy that story as well.
Thank you. It sounds delicious in every sense of the word. And I also want to thank each of our authors because, as you know, the bingo winners, the 6 that we verify by computer, are going to get a copy of the author's books thanks to their generous donations. So that's very exciting. If you missed all or part of this event, well, obviously you didn't miss all of it, you're here. But if you missed part of the event, you had to come late, leave early, or you just want to view it again, we do record our virtual events. And we have a YouTube channel now, Adventures by the Book YouTube. I encourage you to subscribe. It's free, and you can watch any or all of our past virtual events, including our in-person Superbook event, our popular series that we are now booking February 18th of 2024, one of our most popular events. So if you want to come to San Diego in February, and who doesn't when it's cold and wintry across the rest of the world, come and join us. Next up, and last but certainly not least, is Sarah McCraw. She's the author of the novel, The Wrong Kind of Woman. She's a prize-winning magazine editor, writer, and book reviewer. Her new book, The Wrong Kind of Woman, is an engrossing story of grief and renewal, of shedding old identities and finding new ways to belong, beautifully woven against the backdrop of the rapid changes of the early 70s. Welcome, Sarah. We're happy you're here.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'm so happy to be here. And I am Sarah, and I'm the author of, this is my book, The Wrong Kind of Woman, the paperback version. And so it's set in 1970, and it feels kind of funny to me that a novel set in 1970 is historical fiction, but it is, because that was more than 50 years ago. And so that's when The Wrong Kind of Woman is set in 1970 on the campus of a fictional college in New Hampshire. And it's an all-male college called Clarendon College. And it's a very jockey and fratty kind of place with a tone that's a little bit like Animal House, I would say. And The Wrong Kind of Woman it's a story of friendship and becoming the self that you were meant to be. And it's about three people, but at the heart of the story is my character, Virginia. And at the beginning of this story, Virginia is grappling with the death of her husband, Oliver. And Oliver is a professor at Clarendon College, and he dies very suddenly and too soon in his early 40s. And that leaves Virginia, who's now a widow, to pick up the pieces. And as she's muddling along, she's helped out by four women who her husband really didn't like. And these are the only four women faculty at Clarendon, because remember, we're in 1970 and there was very little room for women in academia back then. And that was true for women trying to get into other professions too in 1970. You'd think it would have changed by then, but it really hadn't. And so Clarendon is a college, like the real life Ivy League schools at the time, that's really fighting to keep women out, both as faculty and as students. And the male faculty at Clarendon had given this small group of women faculty a derogatory nickname, the Gang of Four. So back to Virginia. At first, she resists their efforts, but as she realizes, she's really been looking at the world through her husband's perspective. And at that point, she begins to change. And as she becomes friends with these other women, the women faculty, Virginia and her new friends try to bring some change and just a bit of the women's movement to this very traditional college and small town. But when they do, things sort of start to go awry. And my other two main characters are Rebecca, who's Virginia and Oliver's daughter, and she's 13, almost 14, and she's just adrift and really missing her dad. And she's in between, like middle schoolers are. And then lastly, my character, Sam, who's not in the family, and also he's not a woman, but he is in this novel. He's a 20-year-old Clarendon student, and he's musically talented and he's mathematically talented, but he doesn't fit in at Clarendon because it's such a jockey and fratty and waspy kind of place. And both Rebecca and Sam are going to blunder into danger in different ways, which will change their lives as well. And because we are in 1970 in this novel, for all these characters, there's the background pressure of the Vietnam War and all that goes along with it. And so that's the draft and the anti-war movement with student strikes and big city protests. And then more recently, at least in 1970, more radical activism like the Weather Underground. And then at the same time, the women's movement is becoming more prominent nationally. And there's a lot of political division and a lot of paranoia, and we're still in the middle of the Cold War. So these are all pressures that have seemed far away from my characters until pretty recently, but it's getting closer to them now. So that's just a little bit of background about the novel. And I would say it's, in terms of women's history, it kind of goes at it a little bit sideways as we see Virginia struggle to kind of get on her feet and to actually get a job. It's not easy for her, even though she has done a lot of graduate work. And then the struggles for a lot of the background characters. And the way that trying to keep people out can really hurt everyone. And I would also add that, like my character Virginia, I grew up in the South, but I've lived in New Hampshire for the past 20 years. And I also went to college in New Hampshire at Dartmouth College. And I'll just take a minute to see if I can share my screen. Let's see. I don't know if you guys can see that picture. That is Dartmouth College. Am I sharing my whole desktop? I don't know. So that's Dartmouth College. See if I can back out of that. And let's see real quick, one more picture of, oh, I'm not finding it, but here's just a quick picture of that campus after women were admitted. But it was not something that people who were, okay, stopping my screen share. No one wanted to go co-ed. It was a huge struggle for the school to go co-ed. And it was something that I wondered about when I was in college. So I would also add that, like some of the other writers here tonight, I got my start in magazines and I've written for my whole career, but I'm sort of a late bloomer fiction-wise. I didn't get serious about fiction writing until I was almost 40. And that's when I started taking classes and going to writing conferences and putting my work out there for feedback. And I've got several novels in the drawer, like a lot of us writers do, that will never see the light of day. But they say that the writers who succeed are the ones who persevere. And that is definitely true for me. So anyway, what I hope that readers take away from The Wrong Kind of Woman is, of course, a good story with characters that they care about. And I also would add that I love the early 70s and I have a lot of affection for it, because even though it was a tougher time for women, it was also a time of great change that started in the 60s and came to fruition in the early and mid 70s. And I also hope this novel gives readers a little bit of the texture of 1970, what that time felt like and looked like and sounded like. There's a lot of music in the novel as well. So, but I would say that most of all, I hope that The Wrong Kind of Woman leaves readers with the sense that with the help of friends, we can find our true selves at any age, whether that's 40 or 20 or when you're still a teen. So I think that's about all. I love to talk to book clubs, and I've talked to a whole bunch these past year or two, and I've learned something with every book club I've talked to. And so look me up if you would like to have a book club meeting. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know our bingo game has concluded, so hopefully our 6 winners will enjoy the books that they receive. Again, we'll email you before tomorrow morning sometime. If you don't receive an email, that means you haven't won this time, but join us again. We do these periodically and you'll have a chance to win next time. I want to thank again Debbie and Amber for making everything go smoothly on the back end. I want to thank our fabulous authors who are fascinating, talented, interesting, and available for you. And I especially want to thank all of you adventurers. You guys come out regularly. You're so supportive of books and literature and authors, and we so appreciate all of you. I love watching the chat box. I'm sorry I couldn't type in with all of you while we're going, but I see all your comments and I'm very appreciative of them. I love that we've created a book community, that you're all friends with each other. And it makes me very happy, and it makes me happy to see people from Canada here as well. So our book adventurers are expanding, and we hope to meet you all in person someday, either at an Adventures by the Book in-person event in San Diego, maybe in Napa, Sonoma, wine country. And we hope to next year start up our traveling Adventures by the Book again, now that COVID has, fingers crossed, mostly gone away. I don't know, safe enough for us to travel. So thank you again, everybody. I hope you have a lovely evening. Don't forget, you can still purchase books from the authors on our website, adventuresbythebook.com, and we'll ship them out directly to you. Thank you again, everybody. And until next time, what is your next adventure by the book? Bye.